One of the interesting parts of my journey in the Way of Mastery has been going on 8 pilgrimages over, see, started in 2003 and ended in 2019, over 16, 17 years inclusive, with the channel JM. 8 different pilgrimages at 8 different times. I first became aware of the pilgrimages in 2003 when, in one of my final sessions with Joshua through JM, a private channeled session, he brought up this subject to me. I just had a reading with him, and the readings had always been no more than one a year, often longer than that. I never knew if there was going to be another one or not. And Joshua would kind of give me homework, and I'd work on the homework for most good part of a year, and only when I'd completed it did he somehow know to show up again and there'd be an opportunity for another session. I sensed that the sessions were ending. I was coming to the end of what my needs were for the sessions, and it was always kind of on a need-only basis that they would occur. So I was kind of having some sadness about this because it's such a beautiful joining every time it happened. And I'd also, at about the same time, in February of 2003, heard about the first pilgrimage going to Israel. Now, I heard about a lot of different trips that the group's been going on. They'd gone to France and Hawaii and Santa Fe a lot. I had a young child at the time. I was a working painter and artist, and for a lot of reasons, I hadn't gone on any of the trips. Time and money and responsibilities and so on. And now there was a trip to Israel coming up, and I had heard about it, and I thought, well, here's another trip I don't get to go on. So coming into the channeling, at the end of this channeling, I felt this great sense of completion and really sadness that maybe this was going to be the last one. So much to my surprise, about a week later, JM was in Massachusetts doing sessions for people. And he was still in Massachusetts. I get a call, and I was invited to go to another session a week later instead of it had never been less than maybe half a year. So that was very surprising to me, and of course I'm going to say yes. So I go in, and Joshua starts, which is also unusual, if not unprecedented. He starts by saying, "Beloved friend, have you heard about this trip to Israel?" I said, yes. Again, thinking, here's another trip I'm not going to get to go on. Yeah, thanks a lot. And so then he says something to me, and remember, after all these years, I'd seen him know things there was no way he could know. In the readings, he was always giving these amazing, perfect answers to things, like, in the Olympics, they give a 10 if you're perfect, and it felt like the tone and the quality of the answers. One of the reasons I'm so dedicated to Way of Mastery, so I've never seen any answers come like this from any other source. And I've been doing this for 8 years with him, right? And learning to channel with him myself in that time as well. So, so he brings up the subject. He says, "Have you heard about this trip to Israel?" And I go, "Yeah." And he goes, "Beloved friend, we think that you might enjoy going on such a trip." Now, for me, when he says that type of thing, I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to Israel. Because what are you going to do? What are you going to say no to him, right? You say no to his invitation? So I'm like, wow, okay. And then he continues, and he says, "And this is why. Many beings who walked with me in those days will be returning together, so that the trauma that they still carry in their souls from the events of that time can finally be brought up, observed, embraced, and healed. Would you be interested in such a trip?" Well, there's been a little past life stuff in the pathway before, but nothing as overt as that to me, yeah. And I was fascinated by the idea. I went home, and my wife Shirley said, she's not really into this, and so, but I'd tell her about the readings, and she'd say, she'd comment on them. And on this one, I told her about it. I'm kind of like, I don't really know if I can do this. Go. And she goes, "Well, you have to go. You have to go." So that was a really supportive part of it for me, that she was behind it. And Joshua also added, and there are other things will be happening too on the trip. So that was the first trip, and the trip ended up taking place in, it was October and November of 2003. And it was absolutely mind-blowing the whole time. We could talk for hours about the first pilgrimage to Israel. But I'll just share one story. And I will say that I saw many people would come to a place they hadn't heard this, what Joshua, he didn't tell me to share that with everybody. He just said, just so you know, this is what the trip's about. So I hadn't shared it with everyone, and yet people kept showing up, not only on that trip, but pilgrimage after pilgrimage after pilgrimage after pilgrimage, and so on for 8 pilgrimages. And people would consistently have experiences where they'd have a flashback to a previous life. I remember having been killed by Romans, or having been a Roman killing the people or whatever. And these people came from all over the world, from people who were from the Way of Mastery or Course in Miracles, or totally unconnected to it. Totally had never been on, just saw some ad for a pilgrimage to Israel and thought they had to go on this one. So amazing confirmation over 15 years, 16 years of pilgrimages, where everything that Joshua was saying was happening. And you can imagine being in a context like that and seeing that, wow, this seems like this is actually real. This is actually happening. And that's a remarkable thing. But I want to tell a quick story about one of the events that happened at the end of the first pilgrimage to Israel. There were many events. So we had met a man named Eliyahu McLean, who was a Jewish rabbi, young guy, a little younger than I am, and I was much young. I was in my early 40s at the time. And he had grown up in Hawaii, and then had gone to school at Berkeley, and had a Christian minister for a dad and a Jewish mom. So at some point, he had decided to go to Israel to look into his Jewish roots, and he'd been so transformed by the experience that he became a rabbi. So he was a rabbi, and he's doing peace work. He runs a peacemakers, Jerusalem Peacemakers group in Israel, where he's working with Arabs and Palestinians as a Jew and Christians. And he's so well respected that when the Intifada, the uprising, occurred, and the police cleared all the streets of everyone. Everyone was told to go off the streets in Jerusalem. They knew him and knew what he was about and said he can stay. And he's someone who's highly respected and has connections with all the higher levels of people in the governments and the religions. Really amazing guy, Eliyahu McLean. So JM, the channel of the Way of Mastery and the leader of our group, met Eliyahu and decided we're going to scrap our entire itinerary and we're just going to follow him around. And he's going to introduce us to his friends. So this happened. We spent 4 or 5 days in Jerusalem, then went off to the countryside, to Galilee, the Dead Sea, and then came back to Jerusalem. Then at the very end of the trip, we were going to go and we were going to meet friends of his, a Jewish community living by the Dead Sea, who also had a rabbi for a leader, a friend of his, a young guy. So we went and met this group, and we met at their community center. And the community center's up on top of kind of a ridge. I don't know how big the place is. It holds 80 people, something like that, where they have, they play ping pong and have their meals or something. So we go in, and we're a group of 40, and they have a group of 40 also. So we have 80 people in there, and it's a nice meeting. We get to meet everybody, have a chat with everybody, and then we're going to come out of the community center kind of gradually and wait on the top of this ridge, then go down this big hill to a huge campfire next to the Dead Sea. Now, we can't see the Dead Sea because it's night, but we take their word that it's there. So we come out, and one of the things that everybody's talking about is the fact that it hasn't rained in 9 months in Israel. It's an enormous issue for them. And when they have drought, it's an enormous issue because it's a dry climate anyhow, and their entire livelihood's based on the rain. So JM and I and some others are standing on the top of the ridge, waiting for the others to come out and all to go down the hill. And it rains. It rains for about a minute, just lightly. I'm talking to JM about the Red Sox and the Yankees at the time, as I recall. And we're both baseball fans. So eventually, we end up walking down the hill. And we engage with this group around this amazing campfire, huge campfire, 80 people all around, and we enjoy Middle Eastern hospitality for an hour and a half. Hummus, olives, tea, the whole thing. And storytelling and introducing and very polite, beautiful hospitality. That's the culture, Middle Eastern culture. Something that all the traditions, all the religions have in common, by the way, is a common Middle Eastern culture, which is cool because that unites them in a sense, or it has the potential to. So anyhow, this goes on, and this guy is this rabbi is a musician, and he's standing up. I happen to be sitting right next to him, a circle of 80 people, and he's there playing his guitar, and he plays the guitar for a while, plays a few songs. Everything's beautiful. I'm thinking this is an amazing place to be. So finally he says to us, well, who are you people? Because you're not a church group, which we often get, or a religious group. There are how many different people are from different countries in this group? Then I think we had 8 different countries represented in the group. That was unusual. What brings you together? He's wondering. And more importantly, he says, in our culture, who you're introduced to us by matters to us. And Eliyahu is that we pay more attention when someone who we consider to be, an important person introduces someone to us, or a dear friend introduces us to someone. We pay more attention. It's something we consciously are aware of. And you are introduced to us by Eliyahu, who's a very significant person to us. Moreover, when you were standing on the top of the ridge, it rained on you. And in our tradition, that means that we're in the presence of holy people when this occurs. So we kind of look at each other thinking, well, this guy who we think channels Jesus has told us, and Jesus has told us that we're supposed to come here and, we're healing our past life relationships with this land and what's happened to us here long ago. And I can kind of sense Jesus, or Jeshua as we call him, hovering above JM right now. And we don't feel we can really share all that. So we're trying to come up with an answer. We're kind of looking at each other like, anybody got some thoughts as to what we can tell this guy? So somebody comes up with, we feel very close to Jesus. I thought, that's a fantastic answer. Thank you so much. We'll run with that. So we say to this rabbi, we feel very close to Jesus, and see if that satisfies him. Sure enough, it does. He says, oh, you're Christians. I don't have a problem with being called that. That's really true in a sense. Though I think that it's maybe not traditional Christianity, but whatever's working for this guy. So he goes along and says, well, I've got a story for that. And it turns out he's looking for another song to sing. So he says, in our Jewish tradition, the Messiah hasn't come yet. In yours it has, but in our tradition it hasn't. And so we have a tradition of treating everyone as if they might be the Messiah. And he's got a song for this. So his song is called "The Messiah is Among Us." And he starts singing it. So he's playing his guitar, strum, and the lyrics, I don't remember the lyrics exactly, but they go kind of around in the circle, but I remember the lyrics of the chorus. And the lyrics of the chorus are, "The Messiah is among us." So he sings the lyrics and goes around and comes back to "The Messiah is among us." And this happens 4 or 5 times. And I'm noticing, we're sitting out there. Now, it's only rained the 1 minute when we were standing on the ridge. But I'm looking off into the distance, and way off in the distance behind this guy are these little cracklings of lightning. And I'm thinking, that's pretty cool. We're standing here by the Dead Sea. We're in Israel. We're this amazing group, this huge campfire. I'm looking up. I see the black silhouette of this rabbi playing. There's little cracklings of lightning in this. It's pretty cool. So he comes to the final chorus. And God is my witness, this occurred. I have eyewitnesses. I'm not the only one who saw it. He comes to the final chorus. And think about the place and the timing, the conclusion of the first trip. This sacred gathering. He comes to the final chorus, and he decides he's going to belt it out. So he goes, "The Messiah is among us!" But halfway through, this huge, vertical shaped, so it straight up and down from sky to ground, lightning bolt silhouettes him. So you hear nothing he says, this huge, loud lightning bolt. Just as he's saying the Messiah is among us in his final chorus of this song to us. Now, I don't know how my retelling this story hits you, but when you're there and that happens, that is life-changing. I just went, what just happened? Are we in a movie? It's like Charlton Heston in the Ten Commandments, like getting hit by the lightning or whatever. I don't even remember the story, but I just remember kind of this image. And it's just seared in my mind, this image of exactly at that moment, the absolute perfect instant, this huge lightning bolt, the first real lightning bolt, and the only one that happened, silhouettes him just as he sings out, "The Messiah is among us." So, a few minutes later, JM starts describing who the group is. And from just before he starts till just a little while afterwards, it rains again. And then for the first time in 9 months, Israel had proper rain that evening. Thank you for listening.